move it to the, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, we'll have she'll comment on it briefly, but it will formally go before the full board.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Super. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the OWEB Climate and Water Committee meeting of December 15th. I and my esteemed colleague Bruce are co-chairs of this meeting, and we've been alternating, so I'm going to lead this meeting. Bruce led the last meeting, but wanted to start out with a welcome to everyone, and also to go around on introductions. And I don't know if it's best to, we can start off by trying to hand it off, or otherwise, if that slows us down, then I'll just call out on people based on how people are showing up on my screen. But my name is Jamie McLeod-Skinner. I am a member at large of the OWEB board, and I'm based in Central Oregon. And then why don't we go from there to Bruce? Why don't you go next?
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm Bruce Buckmaster. I am a member at large as well from Astoria, Oregon.
And
Dana,
there we go.
or Meg, whoever.
Am I? Okay, I'll go. Thanks. My name is Meg Reeves, and I'm the Water Resources Commission representative on the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, and I live in Corvallis.
How about I'll just prompt Gary? Why don't you go next?
Morning, everyone. My name's Gary Marshall. I am an OWEB board member at large, and I live in Harding County.
Jesse, you're next on my screen.
Good morning, everybody. Jessie Kirshner, Water and Climate Programs Coordinator here at OWEB.
Ken.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ken Fetcho, and I am OWEB's Effectiveness Monitoring Coordinator and Tribal Liaison.
Great. Stephen.
Good morning, Steve Brandt, Fisheries Professor representing Oregon State University Extension on the OWEB board.
Thanks. And Dan, or Daniel. And Dan, yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Hi, everybody. Dan Brown, ex officio EPA representative to the OWEB board.
Thanks. And Eric?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Eric Murray. I guess a lot.
That's on me. Let me, Eric Murray, why don't you go next? And then we'll jump to Eric Hartstein. Then we'll go to our other Dan just to get the double names taken care of. Eric Murray.
Yeah, sorry, Eric Hartstein. Eric Murray and NOAA Fisheries representing on the board.
And Eric Hartstein.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Eric Hartstein, Board and Legislative Policy Coordinator for OWEB.
Why don't we go to Dan Shively? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dan Shively. I'm the Forest Service representative to the OWEB board in a non-voting capacity, and live and work here in Portland, Oregon. Jamie and others, unfortunately, I can only join for the first half hour this morning. Thanks.
And Dan, once we get into the agenda, I'll just ask if there's anything specifically you want us to bump up on that. Scott.
Good morning, everyone. I am Scott Altenhoff with Oregon Department of Forestry, and I'm the Urban and Community Forestry Program Manager.
Thank you. Lindsay.
Good morning, everybody. Lindsay McClary, Public at Large voting member. I live in Salem and I work for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde.
Thank you. Rose, you're next.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rose Graves, and I'm a landscape ecologist working with the Nature Conservancy in Oregon, and I live in Columbia County.
Thanks. Kelly.
Good morning, everyone. Kelly Coates, Tribal Representative on the OWEB board, and I work for the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians.
Thanks. Stephanie.
Morning, everybody. Stephanie Page, Deputy Director at OWEB.
Thank you. Josh.
Good morning, everyone. Josh Bernard, Forest Resources Division Chief at Oregon Department of Forestry.
Thanks. And April's also on screen. April, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself. She is our fearless, behind the scenes, get it done person at OWEB, but does a great job. So appreciate her setting things up. And then just a quick reminder, our meeting is being live streamed and our virtual meeting is being live streamed. So members of the public can can hear about what we're talking about in committee. Those of you who are watching on YouTube, the meeting materials are in the board and committee section of the OWEB website. And materials are, it's toward the bottom of the page, and you can just click on the different committees to get access to the agenda for today. I'll also, while I'm reading through this, Stephanie or Jesse, if you could just put up on screen the agenda for today so people can see that real quickly. We've gone through introductions, and then just briefly on the agenda, we're going to talk about the qualifying climate benefits, riparian reforestation, the Emerald Ash Borer invasion of the Pacific Northwest, discuss committee priorities and intersectionality between committees, because one of the things we found as we looked at our committee structure is there's things that overlap. So we have a standing item on the agenda to make sure we're touching base on that. Talk about, provide an update on the climate resolution rulemaking process that we started, I believe it was last January. And then have a public comment section. We did receive a public comment that's going to the full board. We'll touch on that and also the process for those listening in. And then finish with some good of the order topics. So with that, I'll just start out with folks on our members. Is there anything else? I know you all saw the agenda ahead of time. Is there anything else that's a pressing issue that you think we need to add to the agenda? And then the other question for Dan, is there anything you'd like to see us bump up in the agenda so you can participate in the conversation while you're joining us?
Yeah, I think the order is fine, Jamie. I would, for the record, point out that our Forest Service state and private forestry staff are working diligently with Oregon Department of Forestry and others around agenda item number 2, the finding and investigation of the Emerald Ash Borer here within just west of Portland. And I just wanted to share that. So we've been integrally involved there with our forest health specialists.
Excellent. And actually, why don't we then just bump that up to the first item on the agenda, just make sure we're addressing that in full, and then we'll swap 1 and 2 on that. So with that, ask for a staff report or staff presentation on the Emerald Ash Borer invasion of the Pacific Northwest item.
Thank you, Jamie. Jesse Kirshner, OWEB Water and Climate Programs Coordinator. I'm actually going to turn it over to Josh Barnard from ODS and Scott Altenhoff, and they're going to take it from here to lead us through the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. Good morning, OWEB Climate and Water Committee members. My name is Josh Barnard, Forest Resources Division Chief with the Oregon Department of Forestry. I'm joined today by Scott Altenhoff, our Urban and Community Forestry Program Manager, and we're here to provide you a brief update on the Emerald Ash Borer situation in Oregon and how we're working with a broad array of regional partners to minimize the negative impacts of this pest. As you undoubtedly know, EAB will have major implications for climate mitigation and adaptation efforts and on watershed protection efforts. Scott will now lead us through a short presentation, and then we'll be available to answer questions.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you everyone for allowing us this opportunity to discuss the Emerald Ash situation in Oregon. In this limited amount of time, it will be challenging to really go into too much depth, but our primary goal is to just initiate a discussion and hopefully make this the first of many conversations in the years to come. So I hope today to cover 3 main areas as listed here, to quickly summarize the status quo of Emerald Ash Borer in Oregon, and to let you know about what we've done up to this point in time, some of the preparations that have made an essential difference relative to other states where Emerald Ash Borer has appeared. Oregon is now the 36th state to experience infestation by Emerald Ash Borer. Second goal is to highlight some of the threats and challenges related to climate and water resources. I know you folks are all very aware of the threats to all the hard work that has been undertaken over the many millions of dollars of resources that have gone towards protecting our riparian areas, our wetlands, and to really make inroads to climate mitigation and adaptation. And the emerald ash borer is a very serious threat. And then lastly, I'd like to discuss some of the opportunities for responding to and recovering from the threats and challenges posed by emerald ash borer. So I expect that everyone has heard that earlier this summer, emerald ash borer was first confirmed in Forest Grove, just southwest of Portland. Why is it an issue? Well, quite simply, emerald ash borer is the costliest and most destructive forest pest to ever appear in the United States. Extermination has not been, or eradication has not been possible in the 35 states that it has appeared. It has destroyed hundreds of millions of trees and cost taxpayers and states hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars. It's a very serious pest that basically it's a jewel beetle, a buprestid. As you can see, it's about a ½ inch long. Its preferred host is ash of any variety, so it will go after ornamental ash. We have probably 8 to 10 species or varieties of introduced ash throughout our urban forests, and then most importantly, our native ash, Oregon ash. We have extensive populations of ash that are integrally tied to our precious wetlands and riparian zones. The larvae of the emerald ash borer will girdle a tree over the course of 3 to 5 years. And as you can see in the far right picture, it's a slow decline, but inevitably the emerald ash borer wins. The progression of emerald ash borer has been relatively fast-paced. It was first detected in Michigan in 2002. We suspect it was probably present several years prior to that. It came over through the packing materials, the cribbage or the pallet material from shipping. The emerald ash borer's native range is in Manchuria, northern China, kind of nestled in between Mongolia and Russia. And in its native range, emerald ash borer only destroys trees that are stressed, much like our native beetles. However, here in the US, the emerald ash borer doesn't discriminate between unhealthy trees or healthy trees. It goes after everything, and it definitely takes its toll. Over the course of a decade, emerald ash borer was able to, despite our best efforts to contain it, it jumped quarantine and natural geographic barriers, the Rocky Mountains, and it was detected in Colorado. 2019, it had reached 33 states, and just earlier this summer, finally made it out to the West Coast, first detection site on the West Coast. And as mentioned, we are now the 36th state to experience emerald ash borer. You've likely seen images of back east. This is in Ohio, pre-emerald ash borer, and very lush, typical neighborhood residential site lined with ash trees. And this is what it looked like a few years later: complete decimation, utter loss of all the shade and ecosystem services that our street trees provide. In a relatively affluent neighborhood, the impacts are going to be significant, but far less than in disadvantaged or vulnerable neighborhoods. You can imagine in areas, especially out here, where many people do not have air conditioning on a 205 to 200 or 105 degree day, it could be the difference between life and death. Also, relative to our discussion today, you can imagine the extreme loss of stormwater benefits that this mortality would cause. And that is our great concern. And lastly, also relevant to the discussion at hand, consider all the carbon that had been sequestered by these trees. And this is just one street out of several hundreds of thousands. of streets that have lost their street trees, and not to mention natural areas and developed parks. So this is a very real issue. In an urban setting or peri-urban setting, the costs are not just economic or ecological, they're also social. The Pacific Northwest Research Station just published an article by Jeffrey Donovan and others that highlighted the association of trees in Portland with amazing health benefits. And we've seen time and time again over the last decade that urban nature is not a necessity, or a nicety rather, it's a necessity for human health and well-being. And when emerald ash borer takes hold in a community, it's not just economic costs, it's ecological costs and social human costs, very real secondary implications. Our primary, or at least our primary concern here in Oregon is the impact of emerald ash borer on our native ash, Fraxinus latifolia. As you all know, that species is closely tied to temperature regulation for our waterways and wetlands, soil building. It's a hugely important species for avian habitat, for nutrient cycling, for aquatic organisms. It's really an ecological workhorse. And as you can see by the center distribution map, it's a corridor. Once emerald ash borer starts building steam, there's a literal freeway, I-5, that runs north to south, and then our various waterways and tributaries. It's going to proceed very quickly. So we're doing our best to understand how to slow it down and get a jump on it and counteract the negative impacts and figure out who is going to be most impacted, not just ecologically, but in urban settings, the socioeconomics, and we're going to try and prioritize disadvantaged neighborhoods for the reasons mentioned previously. As you all likely know, there are a number of threatened and endangered species that are utterly dependent on Oregon ash and the various habitats in which they anchor. That ranges from coho and steelhead and Chinook salmon of various types to the Columbian deer, white-tailed deer, and a variety of other very important plant species. So what have we done here in Oregon to prepare for the arrival of emerald ash borer? In contrast to the Midwestern states that had very little, we just didn't know about emerald ash borer, and EAB got its foothold and was operative for 3 to 5 years. We've had a lot of advanced warning, and we've been able to prepare. Arguably, most importantly, the most important thing we did was to convene partners and community stakeholders, agency representatives, to develop a plan. As you see on the left there, our readiness and response plan for Oregon. And it truly has made an essential difference. It's allowed us to marshal resources to take care of some essential preparatory tasks that will definitely minimize or help minimize the impacts of and reduce the spread of emerald ash borer. The image on the right is a guide from the Oregon Forest Pest Detectors Program, which has made a very real dent in it's prepared natural resource practitioners, landscapers, and arborists to quickly identify, to understand the signs and symptoms of emerald ash borer. And actually the person up in Forest Grove who first saw and reported the sighting that was later confirmed was one of our community organizers and was integrally involved in the Oregon Forest Pest Detectors Program. So early detection and rapid response proved to be very important. Additionally, in contrast to any other state, we are the first state to do extensive seed collection. We've now completed a program to collect 1 million seeds from about 30 different populations of Oregon ash throughout the state. So worst case scenario, we now have that genetic material stored in 3 repositories here in Oregon at the Dorena Center, in Ames, Iowa, and in Fort Collins, Colorado. Long-term seed banks that if we need to eventually, if we lose genetic material, we have something to fall back on. The image on the right shows trap setting over the course of 2013 to 2016. Oregon Department of Forestry and other partner agencies set about 1,000 EAB traps. And although we did not detect any during that time period, we were able to perfect our systems for setting those traps. And now that we know the emerald ash borer is here in Oregon, we have our systems in place. We've also done extensive mapping and surveying to assess vulnerability, waterways and forest types, ash forest types of various sorts. And we know that where the hotspots are, where we stand to lose the most, where we should prioritize our efforts. And I should say it's essential when conducting vulnerability assessments to not just consider the ecological context, but also in the case of urban forests, the demographic context. So we're working to, as mentioned previously, identify vulnerable neighborhoods, low canopy areas, low income areas, vulnerable populations, and really focus our initial efforts on minimizing impacts there. Another key tool for that we've put in place is a statewide tree mapping inventory for communities to really start understanding diversity. One of the factors that gives us an upper hand or an advantage relative to Midwestern communities that suffered so greatly is our high diversity of street tree and park tree and urban tree species. Back in the Midwest, it is not uncommon or was not uncommon to have up to 30 or 35% of a public tree inventory comprised of ash trees. Here in Oregon, Portland has about the highest percentage of ash trees in as street trees and park trees, and that is still below 5%, which is well under the recommended threshold for species diversity. We'd like to see that improve over time, and this tool will help us do so. So there are a number of challenges that we're working through. It's going to be an iterative process, but most importantly, it will involve working with our key partners, sharing information, building our networks, continuing with planning and monitoring, maintaining a proactive and adaptive approach, refining tools and technologies as they become available, and lastly, exploring all options for providing technical and financial support. Our statewide Oregon or statewide EAB task force has broken up into 7 subcommittees, as you can see here, and we're making great headway there. Some of the projects that have been undertaken and will make an essential difference relate to survey and monitoring. This is a screenshot from a Survey 123 app that was developed by ODA and is now being used by our agency partners to monitor the spread. Happy to report that currently we've not detected any EAB outside of the forest grove limits, but we know it's soon to progress. So we're keeping that in mind. We're also in discussion with various experts about revising our tools to get far more granular and to actually pick out at a landscape scale individual trees, ash trees, to just further refine our planning efforts. Using hyperspectral imagery and LiDAR, it's amazing what can be seen, and this will allow us to budget more effectively and to really help communities understand their vulnerabilities. I'm especially excited about efforts to facilitate the use of air curtain incinerators to produce biochar. And here you can think, i.e. to sequester carbon. It's going to be an effective tool, not just to help sanitize infected wood material, but to help keep that carbon sequestered on a semi-permanent basis, much like trees do, but also to enrich soils. We're working to expand opportunities for wood utilization, for milling, and this will have workforce development and vocational training implications. And I'm really excited to have a partner who created a very strong business in Michigan. His business is called Urban Ashes, and he's been able essentially to take the lemons of EAB in that region and make a little lemonade to offset costs and to be able to reinvest that for replanting and recovery efforts. Here in Oregon, we've long been aware of a lack of capacity for tree nursery stock. That need has been exacerbated by forest fires, extended ecological drought, and once EAB rips through our state, the need for trees is going to be that much more dire. And it's important to keep in mind with nursery stock, at least in an urban setting, we're planting larger trees, and it generally takes 3 to 10 years of lead time. So now is definitely the time to start making arrangements and to start identifying suitable species and making those relationships with nurseries. Some key takeaways that I'll leave you with, as you can see here, we really do risk a lot of losses for introduced ash in cities, but most importantly in natural areas, are Oregon ash related ecotypes or ecosystems. And if we're going to minimize those impacts and reduce our losses, it's going to be essential that we adopt a proactive approach and a collaborative approach. This really can serve as an opportunity to improve our overall resilience, triple bottom line resilience, and as mentioned earlier, good communication, coordination, and partnerships that work with natural processes rather than against them, as we so often do, will be critical. So thank you for your time. I know I had to move quickly and could only gloss the surface, but hopefully it's just the first conversation of many, and be happy to field any questions you might have.
Outstanding presentation. Thank you. Stephanie, you want to lead us off?
All right, well, I just want to thank our colleagues from Department of Forestry for presenting this morning. And I'll just mention that we've been just talking back and forth about possible ideas and a role for OWEB in providing support. And so I think that would be something for the committee members to be thinking about. One idea that we talked about is a program such as the Focused Investment Partnerships Program, possibly playing a role sometime in the future just because of the large scale of the issue. So I just wanted to mention that, and I'll turn it over to the committee for further thoughts and reflections.
Thank you. Bruce.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for a great presentation. This is not ash borer, but you're the right people to ask on the question. NBC News within the last week did an article citing 1.1 million acres of firs, dead firs in the state of Oregon, with only 60 million acres or so in the state. Is that something that's on your radar?
Absolutely. These are all interrelated issues, and I will mention that the Firmageddon, the true fir situation, is really a symptom of extended ecological drought that is connected to climate change and to historic forest practices, fire suppression, and so forth. So like so many of our wicked problems or intertangled problems, it's, as mentioned in the presentation, going to be essential to adopt a whole systems approach. We can't just isolate and try and focus on one limited aspect of the bigger whole. And this is where traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous practitioners have the edge, stepping back and not trying to just deal with spot fires, but to truly understand the full picture and to work with those processes. Yes, I go to sleep thinking about all the stories that we're hearing, and whether it's the decline of true firs, whether it's the loss and continued decline of western red cedar or big leaf maple or whatever the species of the day is, it's all interconnected. But I think we can, there's a permacultural saying, the problem is the solution. And I'm a firm believer, if we can understand what the issues are, take them seriously, engage the right folks, and work adaptively, we can make headway and address them simultaneously. So our climate response actions for both mitigation and adaptation, and our fire suppression activities, our efforts to improve social conditions, starting these discussions and working holistically. Hopefully that began to address your question.
Thanks, Scott. Don't forget white bark pine.
Yes, indeed.
And you know someone's committed to it when they dream about the subject matter at hand. Steve, you're next.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's any difference in the vulnerability of ash trees to the ash borer in terms of age of the tree or diversity of the stand or altitude, anything that is variable?
Excellent question. So yes, there are differences. The emerald ash borer seems to prefer certain species. This is somewhat of a new experiment. This is the first time emerald ash borer has been present in native stands of Oregon ash. So we're learning, but we're trying to understand how it will behave within the Pacific Northwest context. And it definitely goes after stress trees. So drought stress trees or stress trees of any sort will put off those pheromones that will attract. So yes, and the variabilities for specific trees, there could be genetic resistance that we're just not aware of. So we're really trying to keep our eyes peeled and stay attentive to those differences. That reminds me, we recognize, all the partners recognize, it's important to do a lot, but if we're not capturing lessons and using this as an opportunity to learn and to document that learning, to apply it in the future, it's a lost opportunity. So we're definitely engaging our university and extension partners to make sure that, once again, this is an exercise in adaptive management. If something doesn't work as anticipated, we're capturing that and shifting our approach.
Great insight. Dan.
Hey, Scott and Josh, thanks for the great presentation. You were talking very briefly about the trapping, I think it was, during the seed collection. And I was just wondering if you could just briefly touch on the effectiveness of that and sort of what's involved. And the reason I ask is because there's so many restoration providers out there. I'm wondering if there's opportunities to help to try to tap into that workforce to do trapping if it isn't indeed effective.
Thank you for mentioning or for asking that. So the trapping that was undertaken a few years back was for the purpose of detection, and I wasn't involved in that effort, but my understanding was that in terms of effectiveness, its return on investment was questionable. It was mostly for detection. That said, there is a technique creating trap trees, in which case a tree is intentionally injured. In most cases, it's girdled to force the tree to put off those pheromones, those distress signals that will call in the beetle, and used in conjunction with systemic insecticides. That is one of the tools that is utilized for a technique known as SLAM, an acronym for slowing ash mortality. And our colleagues and the experts back east have noted that it's not a silver bullet. It won't eradicate, but it can definitely slow down things, help us flatten the curve, and limit the population expansion. So yes, we're definitely going to be exploring that, and we'll be reliant on our restoration partners and water and soil conservation districts and various partners. So we're in active conversation with those folks and trying to figure out how to implement those activities as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from board members or staff? I have a quick, well, I guess kind of comment / question. One is, you talked about information sharing, and it seems that if there's an opportunity to push this out, especially at the local level to city councils, that they can then incorporate into their local planning and also potentially into project development. That long-term thinking you mentioned, I think, is so important. Obviously, we've got to get trees in the ground to be prepped for 5 to 10 years down the line. And then a question I had was, is forestry canopy considered part of infrastructure? Because the question behind that really is, can we tap into federal funds to help us with this work?
Excellent question. Yes, for years, about 10 to 20 years, we've been trying to shift the paradigm and get policymakers and purse holders to understand that green infrastructure, urban trees are critical infrastructure, and we should start budgeting and prioritizing that green infrastructure as we do with built infrastructure. It's been an uphill battle, but I think we've turned the corner. The recent bipartisan infrastructure law, or the IIJA, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, has definitely earmarked a lot of funding for urban forestry efforts, tree planting and assessment and network building. And then likewise, the Inflation Reduction Act has also earmarked a tremendous amount of funding. You might be interested to know also, for the first time ever, the state of Oregon is exploring options for also investing at the state level and viewing kind of combining investments in our transportation infrastructure and viewing the green infrastructure as part and parcel of that built infrastructure. So in cities and along our highways and so forth. So exciting times.
Excellent. Really a phenomenal presentation. Thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you. A quick note. I saw a quick note from Bruce about, are there natural predators to ash borer? Thank you for asking. Very quickly, there are, and that is part of our response effort. There are parasitoid wasps, little wasps that we will deploy. Oregon Department of Agriculture and APHIS has a biological control program, and that can also knock down EAB populations by 20 to 30%. So we're going to explore combinations of the trapping in conjunction with other methods, including the biological control. So yes. Thank you for your efforts. Our task force definitely looks forward to including OWEB and other partners into this discussion. Thank you for your work.
Thank you so much. Like I said, great presentation, really helpful information, and let us know how we can be a good partner to the great work you're doing. So thank you so much. Moving on to the next agenda item, quantifying climate benefits of riparian reforestation. And I know we spent a chunk of time on this first topic, but it was clearly such a critical topic, really worth the time. But for what's now agenda item number 2, I want to turn that over to staff.
Thank you, board members. My name is Ken Fetcho, and I am OWEB's Effectiveness Monitoring Coordinator. And we're just really excited to have Dr. Rose Graves join us today. And I just wanted to provide a few remarks before she begins her presentation, just to provide some context to understand how we got here. And so, over the last year, we have started to prioritize our efforts to explore monitoring opportunities to better understand the climate adaptation and mitigation benefits of restoration actions that OWEB funds. And, mainly this is due to all of the attention that the board has been giving climate change with the passing of the climate resolution, recently completing all that tribal and stakeholder engagement to better understand concerns and opportunities as we kind of move towards establishing evaluative criteria across all of our grant programs. And so, we first heard of this project when Rose presented at the Connect conference back in September. And after that presentation, Jesse, Audrey, and I met with Rose several times to figure out how we could support this monitoring effort and how we might be able to work together to collect some more information to learn how riparian plantings are improving riparian conditions across the state. And so at the January board meeting, staff planned to request $100,000 from the quantifying conservation outputs and outcomes line item from the spending plan to support this monitoring project. This spending plan line item helps to fund a broad range of activities and includes OWEB-led initiatives to monitor and report progress on restoration actions at a larger geographic scale and over a longer period of time. And so this project's really fits squarely in the intent of that spending line item. And so we did brief the grants committee a few weeks ago when they met. So they are aware of this funding request as well. And then, Rose didn't present at that grants committee meeting, but we were able to provide some background information so they could get a sense of this project and what it's about. But, Stephanie and Jesse thought it'd just be great to spend a little more time today with you guys to learn more about this project and provide you the opportunity to ask questions, since this work closely aligns with the committee's focus. So with that, I'd just like to turn it over to Rose. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So first, thank you all for the opportunity to talk with you. As Ken mentioned, I am with the Nature Conservancy in Oregon. My position with the Nature Conservancy is natural climate solutions scientist, and I'm a landscape ecologist by training. I'm really excited about this project, and so it's exciting for me to talk about. I was really excited that Ken approached me after my presentation at the Connect conference and said, we want to know more about this because I want everybody to know more about this. So we at TNC have developed a project to monitor the effectiveness of riparian replantings, riparian revegetation, really thinking about it as those areas where woody plantings are going in place, monitoring the effectiveness of those projects for climate mitigation and conservation outcomes. Very happy to share this project with you and making sure that my slides are advancing like they're supposed to. As background for this and context for this project, Ken went over this a little bit, so I'm going to just speed through it, try not to speed too quickly. I think it is helpful to review the last couple of years of state level policy around climate and natural and working lands. So first, in March 2020, we had the executive order which directed state agencies to take action to reduce and regulate greenhouse gases. Following that, the Oregon Global Warming Commission released their natural and working lands proposal, which aims for an additional 5 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents to be sequestered from Oregon's natural and working lands by 2030. And then following on that, in January 2022, OWEB issued the board climate resolution. As you'll recall, the board climate resolution directs OWEB to integrate climate mitigation and adaptation into budgeting, investing, and policy-making decisions. And I'll highlight the emphasis here on funding projects, like Ken mentioned, that include meaningful emissions reductions, carbon sequestration, and protection of carbon storage. There's also the section here about valuing project co-benefits, but what information does OWEB need to assess the impact of OWEB funding on these climate goals? The main thrust of this monitoring project that I'm describing today is to assess existing projects to provide the information that's needed to address these goals. So when we think about riparian forests or riparian buffers, we often think about these linear strips of forests. You all are very familiar with them. They occupy a small portion of our landscapes, but they pack a big punch. They have a large impact in terms of ecological benefits, carbon sequestration benefits, adaptation and resilience, and economic benefits. Through the project that I'm describing today, we're going to really be focusing on the first three of those. We'll be able to assess those a little bit, and I'll talk a little bit more about how. It's not a surprise to most of you who are here today that there's a lot of opportunity for restoration of riparian areas and riparian buffers and forests throughout the state. In Oregon, this is a graph from a publication from 2020 where I and colleagues from the Nature Conservancy and Portland State University assessed the potential greenhouse gas reductions from various natural and working lands, natural climate solutions. So improved management, restoration, and conservation of natural and working lands. And in Oregon, for this project, we estimated that there's approximately 500,000 acres of opportunity to plant more trees along rivers and streams where they have been in the past or where it's ecologically suitable. That doesn't take into account economic suitability, so there's not a social screen on that, and that's an important question to ask. On average, there's approximately 6,000 acres of riparian forest being planted each year. Some of those restoration forests projects remain forested for many years, others do not, depending on the failure rate of those plantings. But we estimate that riparian reforestation is a critical step to meet those natural and working lands goals from the Oregon Global Warming Commission. It has the highest potential as a natural climate solution behind changing timber harvest patterns in the state of Oregon, and carries with it a lot of co-benefits. But we need to better understand how those riparian forest projects have long-term carbon storage, how to maximize the benefits of those projects, and how to increase the scale of riparian reforestation project implementation to meet those climate mitigation and adaptation goals. Riparian revegetation is pretty common riparian restoration tactic in Oregon. We dug in with the help of OWEB staff to the Oregon's watershed restoration inventory and found more than 22,000 acres of revegetation occurring on over 2,000 project sites between 1995 and 2020. That's what these red dots on this map are. Those are different project sites. These represent riparian revegetation, specifically reestablishing woody vegetation in habitats besides streams and rivers. And those can, as mentioned, lead to large increases in carbon sequestration. And it's a critical pathway towards reaching those ambitious goals set by the Oregon Global Warming Commission. However, we lack data from on-ground riparian reforestation projects that can inform the estimates of our long-term carbon mitigation potential of these projects, and to support the development of climate mitigation targets and metrics. So to address this most immediate need of data from on-ground riparian reforestation projects to evaluate the long-term carbon storage, the Nature Conservancy is partnering with the University of Oregon, OWEB, Clean Water Services, and others to evaluate the carbon storage from riparian revegetation projects, including to evaluate how that carbon storage varies across site characteristics, species composition, management practices, and time since establishment. So we are planning to look at sites ranging from 5 years to 25 or 30 years old. Evaluating riparian conditions that result from riparian revegetation projects, again, across those site characteristics, species composition, management practices, et cetera. And to evaluate how those carbon stocks and site condition vary among those riparian restoration sites and between restored and controlled sites. To give you a little bit more context on this map I showed before, I mentioned that those red dots are areas within the Oregon Watershed Restoration Inventory, as well as this big chunk here is Tualatin. So we have additional mapping of clean water services projects there, and there are some other partner projects that are in this database. We're planning to follow an extensive post-treatment approach where we have several identified restoration sites and looking for paired control sites to evaluate how the revegetation projects, how effective they are. We aim to have study sites that are distributed across a range of different ecological conditions. And so what you're seeing here on this map, the background colors are not matching the ecoregions of Oregon colors that are down here, but each of these kind of polygons is one of the ecoregions. So you can just kind of get a qualitative sense, at least, of the distribution of these revegetation projects across the different ecoregions. And we do aim to sample across those. We're beginning site stratification and selection with a GIS intern in January. And so I'm also stating that now because we are actively recruiting potential sites. And so if there are sites that you are aware of or that you think should be included in this study, now is the time to toss them in my direction. So what will we be doing in terms of data collection? As mentioned, we are trying to assess the carbon storage. And so in order to do that, I'm not going to go through this whole slide, but I'll give you a couple of kind of highlights from the data that we are planning to collect. So for carbon storage, we'll be assessing the carbon stocks both above ground and below ground. So trees, shrubs, woody debris, and soil pools. And then some of the additional variables that we'll be collecting to assess riparian function and condition are things like assessing canopy cover and riparian shading, looking at plant condition and vigor, bank stability, livestock exclusion. And these variables, some of those are possible with the data that we were already planning on collecting, but some of those are additional. So the asterisks that you see here represent the metrics that we will be better able to collect with the support from OWEB. And so what is the value add from OWEB's investment in this project? We estimate that we'll be able to, we know we'll be adding additional capacity in terms of another field staff, a field technician who can be out with our project lead. And that additional capacity will also lead to monitoring of 6 to 10 additional sites. We will add the riparian shade and bank stability metrics to our monitoring study. And it'll provide additional insight onto the site variables that could influence carbon storage and riparian condition, how site prep and plant establishment influences carbon storage and riparian condition. And the addition of the riparian shade and canopy cover metrics are going to be directly related to ongoing initiatives within DEQ's water quality program to better understand and model stream temperature and shading. I think I have 2 more slides, and one is what else from here. So one of the ultimate goals of this project is to help develop better estimates of the climate benefits that we really can attribute to Oregon riparian revegetation or reforestation. in California, they've done some similar studies that have led to the development of essentially a web-based tool that predicts carbon stocks in riparian forests from plantings from year 0 all the way through to year 100. I'm not sure that we'll be able to project all the way out to year 100 based on our statistical confidence, but I do think we will be able to develop a tool that can be useful to OWEB and the state for assessing and understanding the climate mitigation benefits from their investments. I sped through that, but I just wanted to give you all an overview, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to take those now.
Really helpful, Rose. Great presentation. And to the point that you touched on, and Ken mentioned, when we were developing the resolution, we talked a lot about benchmarking and data collection. So you hit on all those points. So really great presentation. Steve, and then Bruce on questions.
Yeah, thanks. That was an excellent presentation. It really looks like you're doing some really nice detailed work. I'm wondering if you're also taking the broader scope of looking at perhaps the big question, trying to get carbon sequestration in sort of the ballpark area and trying to apply remote sensing techniques or some rough measures of level of maturity of a particular restoration effort. Because I'm wondering, how good do you have to be in order to be good enough? And can you cover more territory and stuff with some sort of, combining it maybe with some sort of remote sensing techniques?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. There's on our project scope document, there's a whole paragraph about that. We have already partnered with so the quick answer is yes, we plan to do that. The second answer is finding the best data sets that can adequately represent narrow stream side plantings is a little bit trickier, right? So we through TNC have some partnerships with a group that has done some pretty fine resolution remote sensing for California, and we've got some pilot data that we're going to be testing the kind of accuracy. So some of the data collection that we're doing with the field inventory this summer, we'll be able to test against this remote sensing product to see, how much do we trust, what's the uncertainty or error in that remote sensing product. They don't have a whole lot of field data to test it right now in Oregon, and so we're going to be providing that into that data set. And then if the accuracy is high enough, then it will allow us to do really wide scale, really kind of landscape scale assessments. So it's kind of the next step of this project once we have the field data to validate those models.
Yeah, sort of intermediate from satellite remote sensing. There's also, as you're aware of, aerial and drone sensing and things like that. I know they use that a lot for mapping the spread of vegetation and invasive species and stuff. So you can get at the spatial scale a little bit better than of course, remote satellite sensing.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think there's some really exciting opportunities with this project. So the project scope for what we're requesting and hoping for assistance from with OWEB is different than the overall, like what we can definitely do or what we think that we can do. So Clean Water Services, as I mentioned, is one of our partners, and they do actually have quite a lot of drone footage, and they have drones, and it's something we've been talking with them about trying to see over time what's kind of the bare minimum that we need to do to get a good enough estimate of the carbon storage and trajectory of these areas.
Okay, thanks.
Bruce.
Yeah. Thank you, Rose. That was a great presentation. since we have you here, I have a couple quick questions. One of the, outside of this particular presentation, one of the things since we adopted the OWEB climate resolution that partners and potential partners have asked is what tools are available, and certainly this is one that they may make use of. I believe the Nature Conservancy was one of the sponsors for the NBS Benefits Explorer, and I was curious about if you were familiar with it and what you think of that as a potential tool for applicants across the board on projects to use to inform OWEB about what potential benefits are coming from climate benefits would be coming from their project. That's one question. The second one is in reading the paper that I guess was the 2020 paper, I didn't see a lot on agroforestry, and I was wondering if you had looked at any applications of your work on agroforestry projects. Thanks.
Thank you for both of those questions. The first, I can answer the first one pretty succinctly and say that I've been officially with the Nature Conservancy for just over a year, and so was not at all involved in the NBS Explorer development. I'd have to look a little bit more into how, I think from a broad brush approach, it's pretty useful. I'd have to look more into how well it captures kind of fine scale things, if that was the goal of having applicants use it. So I can't speak to it beyond that at this point. As far as agroforestry is concerned, so as you may or may not be aware, the Nature Conservancy in Oregon doesn't have a strong agricultural focus. We know that there are a lot of folks in the state who work on agricultural lands. And so one of the things that we did for that 2020 paper was not to be, it's not comprehensive of all possible land management actions that could provide carbon benefit. And agroforestry is definitely one that shows promise. I'm not familiar enough with the studies that are applicable in the Pacific Northwest around agroforestry, but I would expect that there would be strong benefits. And I do know that as part of the Oregon Global Warming Commission Natural and Working Lands ongoing technical work, they are considering some of those aspects. So I can't speak to the specific benefits. It wasn't included in that paper, but it is a possible sort of climate solution on the landscape.
Thank you. And Ken.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, thanks, Rose. Great presentation, and just really want to thank you for your time today. And one question or just idea I had, based on the first presentation we saw this morning was, and you guys have to bear with us because we keep asking Rose, like, hey, can you do this? And when you're out there, can you guys do that too? So I don't want to pile on, but would it make sense just to have all the field techs familiar with sign of emerald ash borer, just so that it's like eyes on the ground, you guys will be crawling through the riparian forest. If they can make those observations and share them with the appropriate agencies, just to kind of part of that early detection response that we heard ODF talk about.
Yes, I think that's really important. So one of I'd say I wouldn't feel confident that we could be we've done a full assessments, presence, absence kind of a study, but I do think that we would be sufficient enough to say, we're going to be out measuring DBH of trees. And so for any tree that's in the plot that is an ash tree, we're going to have a tape around it and someone up close and personal with that tree. And so I think we can have at least kind of like the citizen science level of, hey, did I see something that looks like emerald ash borer? And then we can flag that up the chain as necessary. But I wouldn't consider it a full, like, we've gone out and we've monitored these for emerald ash borer. So I do think that, yeah, we will have that in mind. We'll have pictures of this, the little D-shaped holes and the various signs that they should be looking out for.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, great ask, Ken. And thank you, Rose, for that partnership, that continued partnership on looking at all these different challenges that we're facing. Any other questions from committee members? One thing I just want to flag, and it's not really for discussion now, but what really struck me, I like the ecoregion mapping. That made a lot of sense. And just to be thoughtful for OWEB staff as we're working with different partners, that question of, is there consistency on the mapping and how we're looking at data, how we're grouping data, I should say, so that when we're doing benchmarks and comparable data to make sure that we've got apples to apples. So just something that struck me when I was thinking about some of our mapping and some of our partner mapping as we go forward. Thanks again, Rose. Great presentation. Thanks to your team for all their work and again, the great partnership with OWEB and other agencies to do this important work. Really appreciate that. And one question for Ken and Jesse, Stephanie. You'd mentioned this is going to come before the full OWEB board. Is staff looking for a recommendation from this committee on this, on any topic specifically, or is this just an informational?
Yeah, so typically what we like to do before we ask the full board is, brief you guys on the topic. So you guys are, you may be more familiar with it. I don't think in the past we've asked for a recommendation, but if you guys are interested in, voicing that support at the board meeting, and then knowing that you saw this presentation, we won't be able to have Rose at the board meeting to give this full presentation. And so I think it was a time to just dig in a little deeper. And so, and ask questions or raise concerns so staff are aware and maybe rethink that, fund request before we take it to the full board.
Okay, so we won't do it this time, but I'll just say, because I know Lisa and Stephanie have been talking about some of our organizational processes, we might just want to reflect on when we have information coming before committees, whether or not we want a committee to make a recommendation to the full board, or in this case, it would be individual members. So that can just be something we think about going forward. Excellent. Unless Stephanie, unless you have a specific ask you want to make. No, we're good with that. Okay, excellent. And thanks again. We've had some great presentations this morning, and I know we're running tight on time for the rest of the agenda, but I think it was really valuable information that we received. So thank you. Now on to the discussion of committee priorities and intersectionality between committees. I'll turn it over to Stephanie and Dan. Did you have you were waving to for Rose. Stephanie, did you want to lead this discussion, or is that going to Jesse?
Sure, I can kick it off, and I'll just remind folks here at the committee meeting and folks watching on the live stream that this is a standing agenda item, and it's just an opportunity to check in with the other two committees about areas of overlap and synergy between them. I think probably the most connected item, and we've got it as the next agenda item on today's agenda, is to talk about the climate rulemaking process. That certainly has a connection with both the DEI committee as well as the grants committee. So I know we've got at least one of our other committee co-chairs here today with Kelly Coates. So Kelly, is there anything else that you would like to share from the DEI committee?
Thanks, Stephanie. No, I think that the next agenda item is going to be, you're right, the most connected, for sure. I did appreciate today during the Emerald Ash Borer presentation, the conversation and what ODA, the person from ODA mentioned about how underserved populations are going to be more impacted by the Emerald Ash Borer, unfortunately, and that is just a common theme with climate change, impacts from climate change kind of across the board. And so I really appreciated that he pointed that out for us, and we're starting to see things like that called out a little bit more and brought to the front of the conversation as far as DEI goes. So I think that's something we're just, we just have to think about moving forward with how we're going to react to things and, prioritize into the future. So thanks.
Yeah, Kelly, great observation. That it struck me too when he was saying that was part of that thinking holistically about the work we're doing. Any other comments from committee members, folks serving on other committees, or just general comments on the intersectionality of other issues going on throughout OWEB? Seeing none. Okay, let's go on to the update on the climate resolution.
Great. So I can go ahead and kick that off. So again, for the record, Eric Hartstein, Board and Legislative Policy Coordinator. So just for an update, so following the board authorizing rulemaking to add climate-related evaluation criteria to OWEB's grant programs at the July board meeting, staff then formed a team to discuss recruitment for a rulemaking advisory committee, or a RAC, that will help staff develop the draft evaluation criteria. And so we've formed a team, a staff team, and that team also took a first crack at developing some draft evaluation criteria. So we then recruited a RAC, which is made up of individuals from around the state over the fall. So RAC is made up of applicants, potential applicants to OWEB, grantees, reviewers to our grant programs, as well as a member of the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Commission. And so we feel we have a really good diversity of experience and representation of rural and urban organizations, as well as the size of organizations involved in the RAC. We have smaller watershed councils and bigger entities, including agencies involved in that. So on December 5th, we had our first RAC meeting where we discussed the role of the committee, the background on both board's climate resolution, as well as the outcomes related to the public engagement process on the resolution that staff conducted in the spring. And then we spent a good deal of time discussing the first draft of the evaluation criteria. So on that first draft contains what we think is pretty broad evaluation criteria, focusing more on qualitative at this point than quantitative. And so that the evaluation criteria involve right now how applicants seek to engage communities impacted by climate change, how changing climate conditions are incorporated into the project design and implementation, how the applicant seeks to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in project implementation, and how project outcomes could result in the sequestration or storage of carbon and/or adaptation and resilience for natural resources and communities. So we have all of the rulemaking meeting materials that are found in the rulemaking section on OWEB's website, as well as a recording of that first RAC meeting. I think it's really important that we offer both written and verbal comment at the RAC meetings, and we did receive some comments on the first draft that were addressed at the RAC meeting. So for next steps, staff will be revising the draft language actually early next week, based on the input we heard at the RAC meeting, as well as some comments some of the RAC members have provided after the meeting, where they've had a little bit of time to reflect on the draft language. So we will have a second draft ready for the next RAC meeting, which will be on January 6th. And we'll also plan on updating this committee in March with a probably much more refined draft. But I know Jesse and I are happy to discuss anything one-on-one with committee members in the meantime. So I'll stop there, and I see Bruce has a question, but I also want to see if Jessie has anything to add, as she's been really integral to this process before going to questions from committee members.
I think the only thing I would add is just we had a really robust discussion with the RAC, and they pointed out some really key things, particularly around engagement of communities and what we mean by communities, and trying to be more specific. And there was a lot of discussion about how broad to go with these criteria. You know, do we do a lot more lumping, or do we do a lot more splitting? And so it was a very good first discussion with the members of that committee.
Excellent, thank you. And I'll just flag for committee members, we got about 15 minutes left in our meeting, and still public comment in good order to discuss. And with that, Bruce, questions?
Yeah, thanks, Eric and Jessie. I had the opportunity to monitor the meeting, and it was excellent. So I think I have a request. I think it might be nice for members of this committee if you could take a little bit of time and give a thumbnail, just who's on the RAC and their affiliations. It would be really nice for each member of this committee to see who we have on the RAC committee. And anybody who has the opportunity to go back and look at the first meeting or monitor the second meeting, I think it's well worth your time. Thanks.
Yeah, and thank you, Bruce, for those kind comments. I'll just share my screen really quick. I have a copy of the RAC membership. This is also up on our website. Let me see. Okay, so can you see that okay? So we have, I won't go through and read them all, but you can see we've got members from land trusts, larger nonprofits, state agencies, SWCD, an urban nonprofit, watershed council, a representative from a tribe, and again, the member from the Oregon Ag Heritage Commission.
Thank you for that great question, Bruce. Any other questions of committee members? One of the things, this ties into our DEI discussion. A general question, is there translation, interpretation provided or offered to make sure that meetings are accessible to folks throughout the state?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that question, Jamie. You know, this is a question we've been kind of talking about within OWEB, about all of OWEB's meetings and translation services and accessibility. So the short answer is not really. We do offer, you know, in the meeting announcements that if there are, you know, translation services or accessibility issues, that we ask that you know, folks reach out to OWEB staff ahead of the meeting, and we can make arrangements if possible. But I know that's really not a really satisfying response to that, but it is something that we're, you know, looking at as an agency.
Okay, thank you. And even for the purpose of these meetings, you know, if someone is either listening in or listening in later to the recordings, that's just some of that expanded access conversation we're having throughout OWEB. So, you know, more to come on that conversation, but we can touch base on that. Excellent. Thank you so much. Great update, and really appreciate all the work being done on rulemaking. It's a major effort, and I really appreciate staff's intent to do it right and make sure we're incorporating things so we don't get down the line and look back and said, oh, we should have thought about that or should have incorporated that. So great work on all of that. On to the public comments section of our agenda. And Stephanie, I touched base on this before. Stephanie, if you could talk a little bit about process. So anyone listening in who wants to comment on a future meeting, get a sense of what our process is. And secondarily, if you could go to the comment that we did receive that is going before the full board at our next meeting, but we also wanted to incorporate into this discussion.
Yes, thank you. I'll start by talking about the process to provide written and verbal comment in future meetings. So just to review for those folks watching. So written comments can be sent in anytime by 4 p.m. on the day prior to the committee meeting. And the recipient for this committee meeting today was April Mack, but we post each time who those comments would go to, need to go to, just in case we've got somebody on vacation or something like that. So that is a standard part of the agenda, is where to send comments. And then the deadline is 4 p.m. on the day prior.
Stephanie,
and then if
sorry to interrupt, but just if I'm listening in and I don't know where to even begin, can you just reference the website and perhaps like what April, if she's the contact, what her email address is? Thanks.
Absolutely. So folks can go to the OWEB website, oweb.oregon.gov. And then there's a section that has all of the board meetings and committee meeting schedules. That's where the agenda for meetings is posted. So folks can navigate to that for today's meeting. We also do what we call a Gov delivery, and that's an email announcement of the committee meeting, I think usually a week or two prior to the committee meeting, and that's got the link to find the agenda. So it might just be easier for folks who want to watch these meetings on an ongoing basis to go onto our website. So you can just Google Oregon OWEB and the website should come up. And then you can go to subscribe to information about OWEB, enter your email address, and you'll receive notifications about this and the other committee meetings in the future. So that might just be easier than trying to hunt for the agenda for this meeting for folks watching. And so April's address is april.mack@oweb.oregon.gov. But I will note that sometimes April is unavailable. And so we put a different staff person's email address as the contact for comments. So that it will be included in the Gov delivery who the appropriate staff person is. So moving on to providing verbal comments. So kind of the same process. Folks need to reach out to April or whoever the staff person is listed on the committee meeting agenda by 4 p.m. on the day prior to the committee meeting and let them know that you would like to provide verbal public comments at the committee meeting. And so we just do that so that we don't have unauthorized access to these committee meetings or folks kind of crashing the meeting and providing inappropriate comments, because other agencies have had problems with that when they publicly post the Zoom link to the meeting. So that's why we do it the way we are doing. We're trying to balance accessibility with avoiding issues like that have happened to other agencies. Any questions before I talk about the public comment that we received prior to today's meeting? Okay, great. So we received a public comment from the Lake County Umbrella Watershed Council, and the comment was a letter submitted to the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife Director Kurt Melcher. The council copied OWEB and asked us to include their comment in the public record for the upcoming board meeting. Given the subject matter of the comment and the timing being right before today's committee meeting and the connection with the Climate and Water Committee's focus, we thought it was appropriate to summarize for the committee today too, and just see if any of you have comments or questions that we might be able to research or answer prior to the full board meeting. So as I mentioned, the council copied OWEB. Their comment was to ODFW regarding applications for in-stream water rights in Lake County, and they were expressing concerns about ODFW applying for in-stream water rights. They explained that a lot of voluntary water conservation work has been done in Lake County and is ongoing, that there are strong partnerships with the council and stakeholders and with ODFW. And they expressed concern that in-stream water rights could affect partnerships with ODFW and the council and restoration practitioners' ability to continue voluntary work on water conservation. So that is the gist of the comment that was received, and you received a full copy of that Jesse forwarded last night.
Thank you for that. Thanks for the overview on process, but also that specific. Noting that we have about 5 minutes left of our meeting, any questions from staff as Stephanie asked, from board members as Stephanie asked for staff to research prior to our next board meeting. And for members of the public, that letter will be public record and available as part of our agenda of our next board meeting. But any questions from board members? Kelly.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just sort of wondering what the process is when, and recognizing this is ODFW, not OWEB, right? But what the process is for notification from ODFW when they're going to apply for these in-stream water rights. Because it almost seems like some upfront conversations and a heads up early on with the ability for the landowners to comment or interact with ODFW about the water rights before, they see that it's happened, would probably go a long way in just communicating what ODFW is or isn't trying to do, and could go a long way in helping those relationships be established into the future and people not feeling like they're getting blindsided by something. So I think that could potentially be helpful here to find out just kind of what that process is.
Thanks, Kelly. Great comment. And Stephanie, if we can incorporate that into the conversation at our full board meeting. Other questions that board members like to see or comments like to see incorporated into the report out on this item at our next full board meeting?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Jamie, I forgot to put my hand up there. I don't know, how OWEB, how the full board will be inclined to weigh in on this, if at all, but it might be helpful also for the board to know what it means for an agency to apply for an in-stream water right. That, for example, it will be the most junior water right in the system. So maybe some background to kind of lay the table for what the Watershed Council is raising. So I think that would be helpful.
Great comment. Thank you. Other comments or questions from board members? Seeing none, go on to the next agenda item, which is good of the order and potential topics for our next meeting. Staff's been doing a great job of keeping us updated, bringing some of the standing items forward and alerting us to potential hot topics. But any other requests from board members? And go ahead and just take yourself off mute and chime in. Lisa, thank you for joining us. For those, because we did intros earlier, agency director. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jamie. For the record, Lisa Chaparral Hansen, Executive Director with OWEB. This is more of a report out and just a touch base with this committee because it relates to the work of the committee. Last week, I was fortunate enough to attend the celebration in Hornbrook, California, of the removal of the Klamath Dam system. And I just wanted to share with the board just like a tidbit about that celebration. It really was a moving celebration of joy and gratefulness for years of work to open up the Klamath system for fish and wildlife into the future. And there was an incredible amount of gratitude toward OWEB and the board's commitment to the $15 million for restoration post dam removal on the Oregon side. And so I just wanted to touch base to know that for all of you to know that that happened. And it really was quite an amazing event to be part of. Governor Brown was there, Governor Newsom was there, Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland was there, former Secretary Sally Jewell. There was a senator from California there, as well as members of three tribes, and Yurakupa and one member of the Klamath. So it was quite moving to be part of that and a real honor to be invited to represent OWEB.
Thank you for representing OWEB at such a historical event. Lindsay.
Thanks so much for that update, Lisa. And just wanted to mention that the social media presence of OWEB is great. And I got to see all the pictures. Really impressive lineup, like you just mentioned. Really great project. I'm not surprised that it was so moving, and I'm really glad to hear that. But just wanted to chime in and say the social media presence is effective. So good job.
Thanks for that comment. Great job, staff, as always. And then Lisa, I assume and hope that you'll also be reporting on that in the full board meeting, because I'm sure that'll be a real opportunity to reflect on that. Thank you so much. Thanks again for joining us with your very busy schedule. Any other points good of the order or requests for our next committee meeting? Things to add? Well, seeing none, thank you all so much for joining us. Thanks staff for all your great work. Thanks board members for attending. Great presentations today. And Stephanie, again, thanks for sharing how the public can get involved in these committee meetings and weigh in. Thanks to you all. And when's our next scheduled meeting? Stephanie, do you have that date? Or Eric? Or Jesse? We will post that. Sorry, I didn't do my homework on that. Apologies. We will get that out in the on the OWEB website for those who are interested in attending our next meeting. And thank you again, everyone, so much for attending. See you at our next meeting.
Thanks.